Okay, well, we'll get rolling here. This is the session. The title is Successfully Transitioning from Field Sales to Remote Sales. And we have some extremely experienced and talented individuals on this panel today. And I'd like to introduce them, what they do on their day job and their daily activities and how they execute both internal and external sales. So first I'd like to introduce Matt Nelton. He is with Sandler Training, which is a very well-established long-term sales consulting firm and training firm. So Matt, if you can give us a little bit of background on your career and your role.
All right, so I own Sandler Training DTB, a Sandler office in Indianapolis. I've worked since 2003 with about 225 companies, from startups to pest control companies, all the way up to companies like Salesforce.com, where we've done training on how to identify, engage, and close ideal clients.
Great, thank you, Matt. A good salesman and with brevity, and we understand what you do 100% now. Awesome. The next person I'd like to introduce is actually one of my colleagues who has helped me improve much at my job and position is Jen Miller. Jen is with Marsh & McLennan Agency and actually is the sales leader for 1,300 sales reps nationwide. So Jen?
Thank you for having me. When people ask, what do? I say, I help you sell more and talk about brevity, right? That's really an open door. From a sales and sales leadership piece, I absolutely love building sales culture. Over my career, I've been in 3 industries: printing, logistics, which included a worldwide rollout of a sales program and building a sales culture with a Fortune 100. And then most recently joining the insurance industry about 6-7 years ago, working at the same organization as Jim. So thank you for having me.
Great, thank you, Jen. Now let's move on to Dave Stump. Dave is with Pierpont Communications, which Pierpont's the largest independent public relations firm in the Southwest. And Dave is one of the leaders there, and I've heard him speak several times, and I hear nothing but compliments from his presentation. So we're lucky to have Dave. So Dave, over to you.
Thanks, Jim. I appreciate the introduction, and it's a pleasure to be here with everyone. Pierpont's public relations, digital, social, and marketing company, headquartered in Houston, as Jim mentioned, and we deal with everyone from the Fortune 50 on down to entrepreneurial firms. And so we have a very broad clientele across many different business verticals, and my role as the Vice President of Business Development is to engage those potential clients as they first come to us, to reach out and to respond to them and to help qualify if it's going to be a good fit between Pierpont and between the companies that we're talking to. So I have a fascinating job, become even more fascinating with the different paradigm we're all under with COVID. And as of course, in something we could talk about as we get forward with sales challenges that come up in this COVID world, my lawn guys have arrived just exactly at the time as we're doing this meeting. So perfect timing, and but one of those things that you go with the flow and you make the most of it. It's actually an advantage, not a disadvantage. So back to you, Jim.
Right. Thank you very much, Dave. And then finally, last but not least, is a good friend, Jonathan Fisher. He has years of experience. However, he doesn't look like it. He's young and fit, right, Jonathan? And is with Brand Extract. So he's good at both developing personal brands and corporate brands to get your message out there and to bring more customers to your door. So Jonathan.
Thank you for having me today. Yeah, so we essentially create, transform, and help companies grow their brands, be it product, service, or corporate. We do a lot in the private equity mergers and acquisitions, divestitures, spin-outs, and product launch spaces for our clients, mostly in B2B. And over the last 15 years, I've worked on about 225 brands that we've created and launched out in the marketplace. So happy to share some thoughts of what our clients are doing today.
Great. Thank you, Jonathan. So the first question, since this is about sales and about remote sales, so how are buyers buying differently now? And I will kind of open that up to anyone on the panel who's had experience. What are they seeing that's changed? Not necessarily just since COVID came along, but even prior to that, that is moving market trends and maybe been accelerated by the pandemic.
So I think right now what we're seeing with our clients is obviously there's been a shift online. We've had some clients that have scrambled to beef up and enhance their e-commerce sections or add an e-commerce section to their website, whereas before they were maybe had 50 salespeople in the field, demoing chairs, going to corporations and setting them up and say, sit in my chair, But they've all, most of them, all of them have shifted to some level of a little bit of e-commerce or at least increase their contact forms, and their methodologies are being communicated and reached online. So that's been one of the big changes that we've seen in the marketplace right there.
I would say related to that, Jim, certainly the last 8 months have changed things dramatically, but the time to close has shifted substantially lower. It's gone from, for us, an average of around 60 days down to an average of around 15 to 20 days. And it's just the urgency of the need for communication. And more than ever, whether you're doing it online, Zoom calls, telephone calls, whatever it might be, the communication needs have gotten more and more urgent. And so people are needing to execute contracts and engage with the sales force and be efficient within the sales process in new ways that maybe cut a few corners. But when I say cut corners, I mean only on time, not on thoroughness. It's increased the use of things like DocuSign. We've gone over to DocuSign to get people, the things that they need faster so they can respond faster. The need for speed now is primary more than ever.
Yeah, excellent. Great point, Dave.
The one thing I'll say to that, in agreeing with both Dave and Jonathan, is the necessity of a clear sales language and clear sales process that is taught from the top of the organization to the bottom is vital. You cannot move quickly if you are moving randomly. I'm a sports guy. I played college football, and I just can't imagine, a quarterback walking into a huddle and saying, "Look, you're all professional football players. Go do your best," and hoping to possibly, win the football game. Those guys practice relentlessly at the fundamentals, and salespeople who are supposedly professionals don't practice at all. They don't have a language to really describe what they're trying to rush through. So that compression of time, the 60 days to 15 days, is a lot more difficult when people don't have consistent language or consistent process to describe.
We do voice of the customer interviews a lot for our clients to help them identify what are the barriers to entry, and what customers value most. People confuse what they're happy with what they value. You can be really satisfied with something, but it actually has no value driver to the business or bottom line, or to the likelihood to refer, renew, upsize, upsell, cross-sell, whatever it might be. And so to both Matt and Dave's point about being quick and being concise, that's a huge effort right now in the marketplace. We talked about this on the last panel about an hour ago. You really have to trim down your storyline, remove all the noise out, and lower any barrier you can to sell, whether it's the way you do your contract languages, the size of your deposits, the speed of your delivery. Because if they're buying right now, to Dave's point, it's because they have an immediate need, an immediate pain. Otherwise, they're going to put that purchase off and save that cash. So really being very, very concise with the brand messaging right now and the sales strategies is what we've seen a lot of shifts in the marketplace around.
Excellent, Jonathan. Jen, since you, to Matt's point about a sales process, you're responsible for training 1,300 salespeople. And how does remote training work in this environment? And how have you seen it be effective, and then maybe some of the hurdles?
Some of you on the call are also either in charge of transitioning things you used to do in the conference rooms and putting them into virtual environments, or you have teams that you're expecting to do that. It's hard. And the easier the training looks and the more fun it is, or the more engaging it is, the more hours went into it. I recently cannot get over, we switched an in-person sales leadership conference to a virtual one. Less time of general meetings, very similar to this one, this virtual meeting, and hundreds and hundreds of line items on the spreadsheets coming into it to make sure that everything went off without a hitch for the attendees. Training, the same thing. We would not have been able to take some of the things we were already doing in training rooms and conference rooms, on airplanes, putting people in different spots, and moving them into online learning modules if I also didn't have a team that could look inside my brain. Because I have the Malcolm Gladwell 10,000 hours to mastery with my own sales process, it's all up here. And I just get on an airplane and I go work with hundreds of professionals at a time. And we've had to break all of that down into what is module, what is homework, what is pre-work, are we using video, are we using audio, are there polling questions, are there activities? It has been excruciating and rewarding to come out the other side now, 8 months in to a global pandemic, with so much of what we were doing in person now virtual. But I will say, for those of you leading teams, or those of you expecting to be learning and training your teams virtually, the accountability has to be on the individual. And Matt, with your Sandler experience, you know, in a classroom, you got 10 people expected and one person's not there. You send a quick text and oh, you find out the airplane was late or there was a storm or weather. You have a virtual session with 10 people, 3 aren't there. Oh my goodness, the herding cats. And then it's all these excuses. And then how much leeway do you give them? There's young children at home. There's logistics issues. There's both spouses working. There's homeschooling going on. There are so many layers to the virtual learning that the accountability has to be on the attendee and not the person in charge of transferring the learning.
So ironically, over the past 2 years, we've rolled out a certification program for all of Sandler's clients worldwide. And we've seen the use of bronze and silver certification skyrocket, which does put the onus on completion of the certification modules on the learner, not the trainer. You know, we provide the training. They have to show up to the sessions. They have to pass the tests, which are scored. You know, the manager can see when they log in. But we've seen a dramatic increase in people's desire to have that self-directed learning, that ability to confirm that people have gotten data and they're producing an ROI with their knowledge.
So Jen and Matt, you talked about accountability and putting the onus on the individual, not the trainer. So the accountability, how have you seen accountability? For example, today there's several of us with our faces shown, but many with their faces not on the screen. Does that make a difference both in training and in selling?
I'll jump in and go first if you don't mind. American psychology research here about Zoom fatigue is coming out quick. I've seen quite a few pieces. Harvard Business Review did a piece on what's more important, what you're wearing or your background. And then we got into deeper, maybe your camera shouldn't be on. I try to make sure that depending on the attendee experience, whatever we're trying to communicate, it could be a sales leadership development, it could be an individual training, lots of people, just a handful of people, clearly communicating if my camera will be on and if their camera needs to be on. Some people do their best thinking and brainstorming walking around. I have a team meeting after this. I sent the entire team a note and said, I really hope you all have a chance to be outside or walking the dog for our call. I don't want anyone on video. But it has to be this accountability piece. Matt talked about testing. I also don't want to ad nauseum come at grown adults with testing. How do you also say, if your camera's not on, I assume you're still paying attention. So if I call on you, you're jumping in. And you're not just logging in to look like you came to the session, but you're doing something else. There has to be a line to say we're all grown adults. and that's a hard one for a lot of managers to address with their staff if it feels like people are MIA.
Right, thank you, Jen.
We want to address the question in the chat box.
Yeah, the question in the chat box from Rusty, and this is a great question. Are we all getting bombarded with sales calls and emails? The traditional format is, are those effective? And how can we differentiate ourselves as professional salespeople to not get caught into that rut and to continue to build relationships in this environment? Jonathan, you have any input there?
A couple of things come to mind. So one, we're doing obviously a lot of, like everybody else, a lot of outreach online, networking through LinkedIn. I mentioned this on the last call. We've used B, as in the letter B, as in boy, 2, the number 2, Beep, B-E-E-P, and Cleverly, which are 2 LinkedIn automation technology platforms that you can plug in. They're super inexpensive. And basically, they supplement, the fact that you aren't going to networking events, lunches, dinners, conferences, and whatnot. And they essentially just plug into your sales navigator and they automate who you want to target and connect with. They use an escalation script methodology where they start out with a simple script and they move to a more salesy type script towards the end of the process. And they're very, very efficient. But the way we start out is by just offering to have a conversation and communicate. And we basically say, we've been working with a number of your companies across a number of clients like you across the country. And I'm just reaching out to have a conversation about how your organization is surviving, and thought I might share some of the things other like-minded businesses are doing in this marketplace. So we start out by trying to give before we get, and we use automation technologies to sort of supplement that process. And then the other thing we do is really keep the scripts very, very tight, simply by asking one question up front, which sets up the pain or challenge that we're interested in identifying or having a conversation around with. We let them talk as much as they want to. Then we move to sort of a situational understanding statement. which is the second framework that we like to hit, which is basically that you realize the situation they're in and they may not be buying right now or interested in that right now or whatever it might be. The third is we make an ROI promise statement that says, we're here to help you get ahead in the marketplace. And I can guarantee that this conversation, even if it's 20 minutes long, will be valuable. So we keep it really tight, and we use a proof, and we follow up with a proof point that says, we just had 4 of these conversations last week with a client. We were able to identify X amount in savings or efficiencies or whatever your value prop might be for that. So the proof point's the fourth one. And then we say, all we're really looking for is 15 minutes, of a conversation. So we ask for a very short CTA or call to action, whatever it might be. So for us, we've really tightened down all the scripts. We've automated everything, and we're increasing, kind of that give before you get methodology that's out there for us right now.
Excellent, Jonathan. Give before you get. There's a book called The Go Giver in sales, I think, out there for that very topic. Excellent. Dave, so when you're talking about online or distant relationship building, how do you build emotional connections? Because that, we all buy based upon emotions, not upon our intellect, and we only going to buy from people we like, right, and want to work with going forward. So how do you build that kind of emotional connection?
That's a great question. And, look, we're all doing what we're doing right now. We're connecting with people through video. And there's such a huge difference between what you can do on video and what you can do in person when you're so close to someone that all of the body cues, all of the verbal cues that you normally would get in a face-to-face conversation just aren't there to the same level that they were when you're in person. So now more than ever, the emotional connection for me comes from a couple of things. So first of all, I'm going to do that research ahead of time to make sure that I fully understand who I'm talking to, their position, their company, their background, any possible connection. And I used to do this, of course, when I was in person, but more than ever now, I need to know something about them. Second of all, the Zoom metaphor of my face being next to you, you have to pay attention to what your face is doing. People can see when you're looking away and looking up. People can see when you're looking down at a phone. People can see more than ever the small little tics that you might have. And so it's important. And I'm not tired of this conversation, right, Jim? Like you just did. So it's all of these things have to come together. It's like a symphony of connection that you're putting together. What's on the wall behind me? Comment on that. These little emotional things. If I was in somebody's office, I would have noticed these things. I'd notice a picture. I'd notice their diploma. All of this has to come into play on, at an even higher level when we're doing it on Zoom and we're doing it this way. So I would just say to you, if anything, what's happened to us in this particular business cycle that we're in is it amps up the need for paying attention to who you're talking to and to yourself, and to being diligent about being prepared.
Right. Great. Thank you, Dave. So I have a question for Jen. By the way, those flowers are lovely in the background. How's that, Dave? I'm commenting on what's in the room. So Jen, the process, in the sales process, what are the important elements that must be there, whether it be remote or in person, to have an effective sales all the way from the prospecting through to the close? What are the steps? What are the needed ingredients that need to be in a program?
Well, Jim, that's a great question. And for the attendees, feel free to private chat if you want more questions. I might take this in a different direction though, my answer. First of all, the flowers are from a sales leader, and I am humbly appreciative. I'm not even sure what I did for the sales team, but I guess it works like that some days, right? Where you don't even know the kind of impact and value you're having with the team. And I joke around many, many times that I'd almost work for free for wine and chocolate, even pre-pandemic, right? So to get flowers was just completely over the top. When you're talking about sales cycles, I want to come back to a few things that our highest performing sales professionals have confidentially shared with me during the pandemic. And I realize that we're recording, and I'm talking about people from all different geographies across the United States, not just Texas, but in our top 10%. Everything they're struggling with selling new business or retaining current business comes down to basic confidence and basic team structure or trust issues, every single one of them. I was talking with one of our highest performing producers, sales professionals, And I said, what's your number one problem right now? And she said, we just moved and my Wi-Fi speed is horrible. That was her number one issue. She didn't feel comfortable calling her current clients or jumping on a Zoom to do a new prospect business pitch because her home Wi-Fi was not reliable and she wasn't allowed in her office. Now, this was 3 or 4 months ago. I probably owe her a message to say, hey, have you upgraded? Have you solved that? But she and I spent probably a good 20 minutes, the next call we had, on her walking room to room with her laptop, one of our highest performing producers, figuring out which spot in her house had the strongest signal so she could work and feel confident when she called her prospects. I had another coaching call where I was working with a gentleman who builds incredible rapport in a room. Think Jerry Maguire with the living room scenario. And he wanted to practice how to make sure he was coming across as not standoffish on camera because this was all new to him and it would be all new to his prospect. And how would he handle if his prospect didn't know how to turn on their camera or wouldn't? So how do you also not be condescending to your other party if you were like, man, why isn't the camera on? So much of the coaching when you're talking about sales cycle, I know you want to get to steps, and I'd rather talk about how can we make sure that business leaders and sales professionals are building trust, credibility, and rapport. That might mean figuring out who loves texting. That might mean figuring out who loves coffee at the beginning of their day instead of a cocktail at the end of their day. So much of this, and I know the gentleman here on the panel with me, I'm assuming would concur based on your comments you've already made. This is deep into the psychology of the sale. And there's not going to be some whiz bang answer, some silver bullet that's going to answer anybody's questions here other than how do you get your teams back to basics? What are your growth goals and who can help you achieve them? And then pick it apart from there. So Jim, I know I didn't answer your question, but I think that the question I want to take in a different direction about this relationship element.
Yep,
Right.
Jim, to use the sports metaphor, and I agree completely with what Jen just said, you know, you can't call an audible if you don't know the playbook. So that confidence comes in even those little things that she was talking about, but it goes back to what Matt was saying before is you have to know where you are in a conversation with somebody and you have to intuitively be able to pivot your conversation to meet the needs of a kid running behind you or a dog barking or something of that nature, relate to it, be relatable, and be the person that is able to turn that into a connection that means something from a sales standpoint. It establishes trust. And that's what we all need to be aware of in this market.
Right. Thank you, Dave. And Matt, that leads into my next question is, so Jen had mentioned trust, credibility, and rapport. Dave backed it up. How do you train into that? You also often hear that salespeople are born, not made, but they're definitely made and sharpened as well. So how do you train into those key elements?
So salespeople are both born and made. I mean, listen, there's not a single left-handed shortstop in the major leagues, right? You have to have some basic wiring to perform a certain job. And it is much more difficult to do a job if you don't have certain skills. However, having said that, you know, one of the things that we find is the most important skill that a professional salesperson has is curiosity. We know there are 5 types of questions they can ask. We know there are 9 areas in any business they can ask about. And so as we work with clients, you know, if you want to develop credibility and trust and an emotional connection, let somebody tell you their story, but you get to frame and focus it. And so learning how to ask questions effectively as part of your selling process and getting people to actually explain to you what's going on and what they need to fix. Now, if you're doing product-led growth for a SaaS company, this isn't really all that important. It's $10 per person per month. But if you're delivering a more customized, higher level, bigger ticket, larger ACV solution, then you better be able to discover what's actually happening in an effective professional manner. So that is, how do we systematize it? Well, you don't. But how do we teach people to be curious? Or how do we teach people to be more effectively curious? We do.
Can I add to that just a second? When you think about the line of questioning for discovery right now, you know, there's current state questions like where are you now, or what are you currently using, or what are you currently experiencing? There's desired state questions, which are where would you like to be, or what outcomes would you like to see? There's benefit and reward type statements, which would be, you know, how would your customer life be better if we made this change for you, or whatever it might be, you know, or making these adjustments that you just suggested. how would things, improve for you? So that's desired, a desired situation and that. And then there's sort of risk and concern questions, which are what are the risks of remaining in the current situation or not doing anything, or, what are you looking to eliminate or reduce? And then stepping back and letting them talk. And then lastly, there's sort of urgency or important questions, which is how important it is to move forward for you in this priority or action or thing or purchase or whatever it might be. What will things look like in your world personally, and as a corporation, right? Because buyers, sometimes their bonuses is at jeopardy if they don't accomplish a certain thing, whatever it might be, or their pay raise or their career promotion. And so it's not just, for the sake of the corporation's bottom line. So, when you think about, selling and asking questions, think about them from these kind of different categories, because they may not be in a situation to buy today. But if you can get them talking about the future state and about these goals and objectives they have, you're going to be in a much better situation than if you're the one doing all the talking. And we all know that the best salespeople only talk about 15% of the time in any given meeting. And so really think about the characterization and the question sets that you put together in your sales playbooks and in your sales scripts.
But just to jump in a little bit, the one thing that science has proven, if you do any of the Cialdini or any of the reading about influence and persuasion, we know that present and past-based questions are going to be 6 times as effective in getting people to change and buy than future-based questions. So you got to be very good at discovering, based on present and past situations, where people want to be. I mean, it's important, as is leads to be, but you have to understand how to ask questions about their current and past state in order to get to that to be state. And that's a discipline, which is learned, not born. You're not born with it.
Matt, that's a good point. Can you give us maybe an example of that? How does that work out in a real world sales conversation?
So if I'm with a buyer or a prospect or even a suspect, right? The three basic levels of stranger that I run into, I'm going to ask them exploratory, diagnostic, forced choice questions, things that get them talking about, what are they tactically doing currently? What have they done in the past, right? What are the processes that they're running? How are they accomplishing? How did they accomplish their goals last year? I work with a company that does software for fundraising. And when they started to ask people, their future-based questions, where would you like to be? They'd get things like, oh, we'd like to raise $1 million next year, right? And that was great because everybody wants to raise $1 million. And then they'd say, well, how much have you raised in the last 12 months? And they go, oh, we raised $17,000. And the 12 months before that, oh, we raised $16,500. All right, so when I start to look at that, listen, I got 3 kids. Kids are great at the future's going to be totally different. Dad, my homework will be done. But they're not so good when you go backwards and you start to build that trend, right? And if you've done 16,500 and 17,000, unless something dramatic is already in process, that $1 million is a pipe dream. Let's build a realistic plan. Whoa, problems are talking with your hands. So
yeah, you're basically identifying the gaps, right, between current and future, or current and desired, right? So,
well, but I think it really starts with the gaps between where they are now and where they were. Right? If I can get that firmly established, because everything changed, but we still have to figure out what the foundation of their business is.
Thank you, Matt. So let's shift gears a little bit. So we've heard a lot about flight to quality at times like these. When times are tough, business owners, customers make decisions about what they're going to do in the future based upon the quality of the vendor that they want to make an alignment with. So, Dave, from a perspective of branding, both personal brand and corporate brand, how do you communicate and how do you get your salespeople to communicate quality as being one of the monikers of you and your organization?
That's an interesting question because it assumes that that you already have a quality reputation going into the conversation. You can't just manufacture out of thin air that, oh, we're a quality organization. There has to have been some something that brought you to this point. Otherwise, you're just going to be spinning your wheels and making claims that are, honestly meaningless. So hopefully you've done that work ahead of time. But as far from a sales perspective and on our sales team, we have to be consistent in the messaging. What we say in our sales meetings has to reflect what we deliver in our outbound publications with social, digital, whatever it might be. Our website has to reflect the same commitments to quality and inclusiveness and all the rest of the things that we claim. All of this has to be consistent for the prospective customer. And so when they do reach out to us, they've gone in, whether by referral or through our website, they've already gotten a sense of the quality of dealing with our company. And so we're able then to reinforce that in a consistent way. And I think that has meaning and it has value to people. And there's not a disjointed or a jarring discordance between what they expect when they come in and what they get when they talk to you. So that consistency of quality, that consistency of expectation, meeting that at every step of the way is vitally important. And it's made, as another point, it's made the importance of preparation and not being ad hoc in your conversations with people that are talking to you for the first time even more important. And I find this with our teams, when it's not just one of us talking to a potential customer, but a team of us talking to the potential customer, we have to be on the same page, all of us, before we even go into this conversation with the prospective new customer. So all of those things have to come into play, and more than ever, people can sniff out when there's discordance.
Jen, I saw you shaking your head there. Do you have something to add along those lines?
I do, and knowing that I didn't know who would be in the breakout today, of course, I don't know if your sales teams are comprised by those who are brand new to sales and brand new to the work world. So we also have a subset of our business professionals in our sales areas that are right out of college, 1, 2, 3 years out of college. And when we're talking about quality, sorry if it's loud, Dave and I were messaging my lawn guys here too, and I feel like he's almost standing next to me. And if we're talking about quality, some of that also means that our brand new young professionals who have no business acumen yet, no business paradigms, no real education in our industry, no sea legs, that they aren't accidentally coming across as slick salesmen to our prospects through cold calling, warm calling, networking, that they're not looking like they're hustling because they're so eager to prove that they made a good decision and you made a good decision hiring them. So how do you slow down, maybe not even on the calendar or the clock, but just in the moment? You slow down with your brand new professionals and you make sure they have a lot of mentorship from your senior leaders. And again, that takes commitment and accountability. So they are learning that they don't have to come across as an eager beaver to maybe accidentally ruin a brand you've spent all of this time building.
I don't know, you want to touch base.
That goes back to training. So Jonathan?
I was going to say, selling in person obviously is sometimes easier than selling on a camera. I was pitching a CEO the other day and he was walking off screen in the middle of the presentation, but selling, to Jen's point, selling with younger individuals or with teams virtually takes even more prep and planning and very intentional handoffs. When you go into a team selling environment on Zoom, we always say one person needs to lead, right? And they need to, like, you're facilitating or moderating the conversation. If the client asks a question, I'm not going to let anybody jump in. As the moderator of that sales call, I'm going to take it and say, Dave, I think you should answer this one. Otherwise 2 people might try to jump in all at the same time, or those with an experience might not say the right thing that I want them to say. You don't have the ability to kick the person under the table like you did. You can quote, do that through these sidebar chats. But the other advice we give is don't use the chat in the Zoom call if you're going to have internal communications. Set up a separate channel with a separate, product, Google Mail, Gmail, whatever it might be. Because I've seen too many times those internal chats end up as public chats because they forget to set the privacy setting on like the Zoom or the team call or whatever it might be. So think about the intentional handoffs. Think about that secondary, communication channel platform. And furthermore, just have a redundant backup. I've seen plenty of calls go south just because the network got dropped or got kicked over. Use a different platform altogether as a backup, whether it's GoToMeeting or, anything else that you want to do, but have one of those always on the standby, always on the wing, ready to go. I was on a call the other day. I've noticed this week alone, because a lot of corporations are resuming back to work. You know, we've gone 50% back into the office. Well, my bandwidth in my office wasn't set up for 50% of the people Zooming constantly 12 hours a day. You know, so we've seen, I'm getting better bandwidth, which is why I'm from home today than I am back in the office right now. So think about those backup and redundant systems and those handoffs on those in those internal communication platforms.
Right. Thank you, Jonathan. So I'm going to shift gears a little bit here. So tools, electronic communication tools, apps. We all know about LinkedIn and Google Alerts and Salesforce, but what are some of the effective tools that are out there, apps that are out there that you're seeing that are really starting to grab some traction in the area of business development?
Well, I think I may have mentioned this one, but there's B2B and Cleverly for LinkedIn automation. So those are really effective, for that. So, I mean, those are a lot of our go-to tools that we're plugging into a lot of our clients that are needing to do, virtual networking and virtual biz dev. Of course, there's email automation platforms that are, HubSpot, Pardot, are some of the less expensive, really easy to use ones that you can put out there. If you haven't put together an ABM program yet, you probably should. You should be thinking about account-based marketing strategies and slicing your segmentation of your scripts up based on by geography or buyer lifecycle or, customer persona, whatever it might be, and then putting that automation methodology out there for biz dev. It's really effective because the sales guys at the end of the day, what they want is warm leads, not cold leads. And the more qualified the lead is, the better. So there's some very expensive products out there that can monitor what people are searching online. Their minimum threshold is about $40,000 a year. So you got to be a pretty large organization to invest in some of those technology platforms that are out there. But I can see who pops my website. I can see what they go to. I can see where they jump off, jump in. I can see what they download. And all that technology and that data can be dumped into your CRM systems and help qualify people and screen people up front, using some of these platforms.
And so, Jonathan, those are tools that your sales force, your sales teams would much appreciate, but that's really driven from top down, isn't it, inside an organization to offer those tools because they are an investment.
They are. Some of them are just a few $100 a piece, though. They're pretty inexpensive, that's out there. And there are some freer platforms out there that you can pick up on. There's as little as $9 and $10 a month if you want to go out and, if your company's not going to help you, find a new data source. UpLead for another one is another one. Moosehead is another one. These are like $9 a month. Any sales guy that's worth their salt can even pick up the tab on their expense budget. It's going to be cheaper than their lunches on some of these tools.
Right. Thank you, Jonathan. So I want to remind everybody, you can go to the chat feature at the bottom of your screen. And if you have any questions, go ahead and put those in. And I would love to put them to the group of experts here while we have them and have your questions specifically answered. Of course, your question will probably be a similar question to the rest of the group. So make sure you go to the chat feature and do that.
So I would throw out a couple of tools. One would be Sales Loft for automated sales cadences. Because one of the things that I'm seeing in my business and in my clients' business is I'm reaching out to my prospects 8 different ways. I'm using LinkedIn and Facebook and Twitter, and I'm using YouTube and email. I'm using direct mail with stamps and envelopes. And I'm using text messages. And oh, by the way, and Rusty asked about it earlier, I'm using the phone. And so that's 8 different ways that you're reaching out to somebody. And if you're using a tool like SalesLoft, it's going to tell you, hey, the most effective cadence is this, and you ought to do this to Rusty today, because this is where we are in the process. So that's one tool that I would do. The second tool that we've seen a lot of clients have success with is Gong, which is a call recording with a machine learning component that will tell you, here's how much your salespeople are talking, and here are phrases that lead to next steps, and here are some information. So those would be two of the tools that I would throw out as valuable that are top-down tools. There are plenty, like Jonathan said, if you're a sales guy and you're not automating and investing and growing your own pipeline, you're not going to be a sales guy for long, or a saleswoman. You've got to be a sales professional. Professionals have tools, right? I can't imagine a carpenter showing up to my house and saying, hey, by the way, do you have a saw I could borrow? Do you mind if I get a screwdriver, but I don't really have anything else, right? So you got to, as a professional, there's stuff that you have to do, but top down organizationally, I think those are two good tools.
Dave, any thoughts on tools?
All these suggestions are great, but let me throw out one that we use on the front end, and that's in the hunting mode. And that is a tool called hunter.io. And it's one of a number of different types of tools that you can use when you're trying to find who the right particular rifle shot target is within a particular organization. And so we found that extremely effective, not only at getting us to the right person. There are other tools that supplement this, of course, but it gets you the right contact information for the person that's up to date and current, and it's updated on a daily basis. And so we found that tool to be very effective, and I'd recommend it, just another arrow in the quiver for any salesperson and sales team that's looking to be effective in the way in which they're reaching.
I'll be maybe the finance voice of reason, Jim, to wrap up this question. I've been using the LinkedIn free version for years, but I'm no longer in direct sales. If I were, I'd probably be using Premium or Navigator. But I also coach many sales professionals who are expensing Navigator or Premium and not harnessing it to its full power. So how do you also make sure, as leaders of your own businesses, for those of you who are listening and attending today, you are truly deep into your 2021 and 2022 planning to make sure your teams are not accidentally wasting your resources? If they go back to basics and they're using the telephone and they're using the free version of LinkedIn and they're fantastic at their relationships and their networking, that might be enough. I don't know, right? Because I don't know your teams. But I really challenge our teams every budget cycle to make sure that only those who need the tools or are going to double their book or triple their growth targets because we're investing in them should have some of these tools that cost money.
Great. Thank you, Jen. Yeah, back to basics. We tend to miss that, don't we? We get wowed by tools and shiny packages, but sales is hard work, as we all know. So Mark asked a question about Zoom Info. And I know that's, Mark, you're saying you use it, and it's a rather costly product. Do any of the panelists have experience with the use of Zoom Info?
That's still muted.
All right, now I'm back. Yeah, I'm a Zoom Info user. I'm a believer in the product. The product has made me money. It is expensive. Everything's expensive. And you know what? If it doesn't work, then it's expensive and I don't buy it. Zoom Info gives me access to data that allows me to talk to, like Dave said, the rifle shot to the right person. And, it might be Zoom Info. I happen to use Apollo IO instead of Hunter IO, which is a very similar tool. There's stuff out there that you just have to have names and phone numbers from, and emails, and when did they change and how frequently did it update? And if you're gonna go hunt, you got to go hunt the right people.
Yeah, Uplead, if you're just looking for contact information, Uplead is like anywhere from 30 cents to 50 cents for contacts, and they'll merge and dedupe and purge for you. And the unique thing about them as a list source is they have 100% guarantee of list accuracy, which is really rare when it comes to these list source providers that are out there. Super inexpensive with an amazing guarantee. Zoom Info is great, but it is, it's definitely not cheap. You're talking usually 15 to 40K a year. And depending upon how you're going to use it and your industry and the nature of your sales process, commodity or consulting, whatever it might be, the different packages are going to really work or not work for you. So, their upper end package, which has got the really cool technology around intent data and alerts, which tell you what people are searching online and can backtrack to who those companies are. That's great, but that's in their elite premium package. And so, if you're not selling something that's got a high margin on it at a big dollar ticket item, you probably can't swing 40K a year for that level of data. But if you're selling $1 million deals, or even, several $100,000 deals, and it makes sense to make that level of investment for the ROI. So whenever we're kind of trying to help a client think through their tech stack in this process, it's really about sort of, breaking it down from its return on investment, to Matt's point about whether he's made money on it or not.
Right. Thank you, Jonathan. Jen?
Yeah, so I have a lot of experience with Zoom Info as well, and happy to put some things in the chat. But it's interesting, you're all talking about if you made money off of it. In the coaching work that I do, I also really encourage sales leaders and sales professionals to try something at least 10 times so you have a batting average. And for you, that might be 100 times. But if you're going to in-mail somebody, don't just in-mail somebody once and say, oh, I never heard back from Eric. You in-mail Eric, and you in-mail Bob, and you in-mail Elsa and Suzanne, and so on and so forth. And you have 10 chances to say, did that work for me? Not did it work for the next person in the next office? And so anyway, we used a lot of sports analogies. I'm a huge fan of knowing your batting average when you're trying something. So Matt said he does stamp and letter. I write tons of handwritten notes, but they're not to new opportunities. They're to centers of influence who are helping me navigate and move and introduce in my network. They get lots of love from me. They get birthday notes. They get handwritten thank yous, lots of high touch. I have lots of data points to know that works for me. It might not work for you. So when we're talking about apps, oh yeah, we can talk about Zoom Info and how we've plugged it into our Salesforce app and all these other things. I come back to the basics. If the person using it doesn't know how many times it's leading to one business or qualified opportunities, we don't have the right inputs to know if it's working on the backside.
Yeah, one of the things that we coach our team on to your, when we're working a team, we want to always give them a 12-week behavior plan. Right? You can't do anything and know whether or not it worked in less than 12 weeks. So if you're going to try InMail, you got to do it for 12 weeks. You got to do it consistently for 12 weeks. You want to use Zoom Info, you got to use it for 12 weeks minimum. That's baseline. And then we'll know, you might have a longer selling cycle, it might be 24 weeks, but the minimum for any behavior is 12 weeks. Go ahead, Jonathan, sorry to interrupt.
No, I was going to jump in and just kind of comment on Jen's comment around 10 being the average. Marketing rule of thumb is 7 to 13 touches. So whether it's email or ad impressions, and Dave will testify to this too, it's that nurture and repetition builds reinforced quality of brand and perception. It's just like when you're running an organics campaign online, people love organics because they're free, but they're time investment, right? It's a content and strategy investment versus paid, which is your money and no time whatsoever. You can instantly pop your ads up. But when you're online, if you're running paid and organics, and you then have impressions, you have multiple impressions happening, and you get an added lift over either or of one of those strategies. So to Matt's point about all the channels he's using for biz dev, those are multiple touches with frequency that he's obviously planned out with a scripted set of messages that escalate or drive to the call to actions that he's looking for. And so that's what builds a brand, time or money. Time is touches, money is touches because you can pay for more impressions or more technologies.
Thank you, Jonathan. So speaking of touches, networking, in this world that we're transitioning now from virtual networking to some of the groups are getting back together, how do you handle the logistics of that, and how do you work with people's sensibilities about safety, and how do you work with your clients and prospects around those matters before you barge in and you realize you've overwalked their bounds from a safety perspective?
You have to speak their language. I'm pretty sure everybody that's in sales knows that the prospect has the money, and you can't come into somebody's office and say, hey, listen, I think masks are stupid, we shouldn't wear them, if they're sitting in a mask, any more than you can walk in with a mask on and tell the other guy who's sitting there, hey, you need to put that on. We have to do prudent risk management, but we also have to be aware that we're bonding with them, not them bonding with us.
I've had some clients, that are adamant they won't meet in person, and I've had some that are adamant they want to meet in person. But the criteria had to be a very big room, had to be spaced apart. And, we all walked in with our mask on. They took their mask off at some point because that's what they were comfortable with, So I think to Matt's point, it's really about what their policy and procedures are and making sure that those are clearly communicated up front. But we're still not seeing that many in-person meetings. I mean, I'm still selling nationally across the country. And whereas I used to have to get on a plane and fly and pitch, I haven't had to travel at all to close business remotely.
I had a few interesting meetings that will probably be quite memorable in the many years to come, when you talk about building relationship, I had one at a dog park, and the other party brought a dog and I brought a dog, and we met at a dog park. I didn't have to get on a plane. It was, a 40 miles. We each drove 20 miles, whatever, we made it work. But I look at some of the unique opportunity to also make sure we're researching well ahead of time. So what if Jonathan's whole team was going to be in his boardroom, but then he's expecting to put me up on the LCD screen in his boardroom? So I'm still virtual and my team's virtual, but they're all together. Or you and your team are all together and you've got that sidebar chat thing going on and a lot of conversation, but you've logged into a Zoom together to present to everyone in their homes. If you have the research ahead of time, you can plan for the experience and get the outcome you desire. And so much of that also knows that you've done good research to know who's going to make the final decision if the customer is bringing more than one person to the.
Speaking of conference rooms, if you are presenting in a big conference room or you do have your people in a large conference room, thinking about your camera technologies that you have in your room, there's a pretty inexpensive camera technology that Owl Lab makes, and they call it the Owl. It's super cool and cheap. And basically the camera has multiple lenses on it that can see a 360 of the room, and it will track your movements and it will sync to your audio. So whoever's speaking, it will shift automatically over for you. So if you are doing team pitching in Zoom calls in a conference space or any space for that matter, I'd encourage you to check out Owl Labs technologies for their cameras. It's a Owl video tool at, I guess, Google that, owllabs.com.
Great info, Jonathan. Thank you. Thank you, Jim, for your input about the dog park. What a great idea. It's creative. And you get an emotional connection over a pet, which is a deep emotional connection. That's a great idea. I might even actually use that today. But my dog's a Maltipoo, so I don't know if I would get much man cred for that. That's for sure. So we have a couple of minutes, and what I'd like to do is I'm going to ask each of the panelists to give one or two words that are action words that will change the trajectory of these business owners if they take these words and put them into action for top line business development. So Matt, I'm going to begin with you.
So I would have three words. The first word would be plan. The second word would be attack. And the third word would be revise. So plan what you're going to do, attack your market, and based on results, go back and revise. Then plan, attack, revise. It's just a cycle.
Excellent. Thank you, Matt. Okay, Dave.
So my three would be proactive, focus, and humble.
Humble. I love it. There you go. That's a great one to end on. And Jen.
Prioritize, accelerate, and elevate.
Terrific. End on a high note. Excellent. Thank you, Jen. And finally, Jonathan.
I would say triple, double, and single. Triple your leads and your data sets. Double down on your digital channels and try to hit singles. Don't try to sell everything in one big pitch. Make it nice, tight, and concise.
Excellent. Great. Well, thank you very much, panelists. The information, the conversation has been amazing. I appreciate everyone who participated as well. And we are going to go head right back into the virtual GenieCast, the same room you've been in, and we're going to have our luncheon speaker. So everyone grab their lunch and enjoy the closing speech. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you all for joining us.